Our guest for our must segment today specializes in learning and change, who has been nurtured by his 19 years of experience. His passion is best nestled in designing OD and learning programs using brain based or neuroscience and psychology based approaches. He started his career in HR with Panasonic Philippines as a senior HR supervisor and then worked as HR director of Clark Polytechnic. Then he joined the academy before migrating to Canada. It is indeed exciting to have meaningful conversations with our guest today who has a horizon of experiences being an independent organizational development and learning consultant in Canada, a registered psychologist in the Philippines, internationally certified as senior professional in human resources, and the chair of PMAP Academy Industry Committee for 2022. I am deeply honored to invite everyone to put our hands together to warmly welcome Mariel Migs Vargas Guina.
Hello.
Hi,
Oh,
Migs.
hello.
Good afternoon. Would you like to say something to our audience this afternoon?
Well, after hearing one of my idols in PMAP, President Allen, ang ganda ng explanation about faith, no? Faith and belief, no? It's yeah, ang ganda. It's for personal and even for work. Ang ganda ng application. And good evening here. Good afternoon sa Pilipinas.
Yeah, I'm very honored to have you this afternoon, Migs. So hindi na ako magpa-ligoy-ligoy pa. I will give you my first question. No? So
Okay.
from your lens, what is psychological contract?
Basically, psychological contract is unwritten and informal, sabihin nating contract, no? And it is about commitment, understanding, and expectation, even belief between employee and company. But most of the time, it's between employee and line managers. Because the focus of interaction, that's where the psychological contract would evolve, no? Yung kung laging nandun yung relationship, usually dun siya because it's the human part of a work relationship.
Yeah. Thank you, Mig. So it sends across to me here that the psychological contract, as you mentioned, is a commitment. It gives also the confidence and the clarity moving forward on how we are going to relate with each other. That's so beautiful. So, what makes now psychological contract meaningful for the leaders and the employees?
It's meaningful and not only meaningful, actually it's very crucial, it's very important. Sabi ko kanina, it's the human side. It's actually the unconscious assumption. So kung titignan natin, this is the fuel ng everyday relationships of work. But the thing about it, it's tacit, meaning it's implied. It is understood and implied, but it's not spoken or written kasi nga, it's a psychological contract, no? And I'll relate this sa sharing ni President Ellen. We're talking of psychological contract. In the middle of the core of psychological contract is actually trust and confidence. Pero if I'll borrow President Ellen explanation, in faith, you believe in something. Sabi nga niya, you put your trust and confidence into something that you didn't even know, but you do that because you believe something powerful, something good, something beneficial is there. In the language of psychological contract, that's about actually integrity. So we believe that this contract, I will benefit from my company would benefit on me. We put our trust on that. Minsan, the expectations are not being served. The assumptions we have in a psychological contract, like they would value me, etc., etc. But of course, not all the time those are being served. But because you think there is an integrity sa organization, the psychological contract is still maintained. So ang ganda ng explanation ni President Allen because even in psychological contract, it's the same. So laging may integrity because when there's integrity, you trust in something. So even though your expectations are not being served, you still balance the psychological contract. And that's make it meaningful because if that is breach, meaning hindi na satisfy yung gina-expect mo. Something very psychological about this kasi even before hiring, nabubuo na yung psychological contract. Like, oh, pupunta ako sa ABC company. Yeah, magandang magpasweldo dyan. Mababait ang mga managers. Then during hiring, further, mas nag-evolve siya, mas nade-develop siya. No? And then, as you socialize in the organization, the more na nade-develop siya. So, if that is breached, for example, na-develop sa akin yung nag-evolve sa psychological contract ko yung I am part of ZB company. And I know they would trust me and they would promote me if I'll do my best and if I'll go out of my way and work beyond the expected time. Tapos biglang na breach yun, then that will be problematic. Sabihin na natin, demotivated ako, I would even resign sa iba. No? Kaya nga, yung mga correlated variables dito is turnover, motivation, commitment, and different factors. Actually,
Yeah.
napaka-broad niya eh.
Yeah, that's so wonderful sharing, Migs. So what really comes across to me as you're sharing with me, I formed the word tip. No, it's because that letter T is the trust. So as you mentioned that at the time that the employee already signed the job offer, the trust of both parties is already there, is already formed, and that it should be taken care of. It should be taken care of by integrity. That's the I of the tip. And you mentioned it's psychological and it is powerful. So that's the letter P. So it's a tip that we are
Yeah.
bringing in together and relating with each other together as the employee and the management. So you mentioned a little bit about some elements. Can you elaborate further, Migs, on what are the elements or indicators of the presence of a psychological contract?
Honestly, once there is a socialization, there's a presence of people like an employee and the employer, but usually it's employee and the manager or even a supervisor, regardless. Um, Automatic, there's a psychological contract. Sabi ko kanina, it's unconscious assumption. Siguro kung i-define natin siya, kung if we'll choose a word, no, it's basically a subjective assumptions.
Mm.
Um, the most simplest term is actually perception. When you talk about psychological contract, it's basically perception. But perception that this is what I do and I'll get this, and therefore you see me doing this and you'll give me that. I mean, you give me what I expect. And kasi nasa gitna siya lagi ng employer or manager and employee. If we're talking about elements, it's basically perception. Sabi, parang simple niya, no? But actually, because it's just perception, or not just perception, it is perception. Therefore, it's hard to manage. Unless we actually do sa part ng HR, we actually do what would manage those expectations. So very important dyan, we always communicate. We
Mm.
manage and agree on expectations. No? We even measure yung attitudes ng mga employees natin, like survey feedback, attitude feedback, organizational climate measure, and those are actually form of communications, like really knowing what's happening in the grassroots level of this organization. So if we do those, then we could manage it.
Yeah, wonderful, Migs. In a very short time, you're really able to really make me feel that how psychological contract really is very powerful. You mentioned about the assumptions, the perceptions that is in between, and that is so intangible, as you mentioned, and that meaningful conversations can really bridge that. And um, just for a last tip, Migs, for our last portion of our conversations today, in what manner the leaders can really take care of that? And on the other hand, in what manner as well Can employees take care as well of the psychological contract?
Babalik ako dun sa sinabi ko kanina. It's very important that we clarify expectations. When words are not spoken and we leave everything to interpretation, meaning perception, then a lot of things could actually develop. So it's always very important that we manage expectations on the part of the employee and on the part of the employer. We communicate, even if it is a bad news. We would rather deliver bad news, and at least we're honest. Kesa sa we promise something and then the other party is expecting it and it won't happen. Then there's a breach of psychological contract, and then the downward spiral would happen. They would feel demotivated. They would think they're not valued. They would have less commitment with I mean in the company, and eventually yun na, no? Yung mga resignations and other not pro-social behaviors, meaning yung antagonism, etc., etc. But I would go back again to a good point by President Allen. Even if we do all these things, like we manage expectation, we provide training, sabihin na natin, we do everything, it's still very important that we preserve integrity, because the core of psychological a positive psychological contract is integrity, because not all the time kasi fluid siya eh. Psychological contract is very fluid. It would change, and not all the time psychological contract is being satisfied. It's That's impossible, because a lot of factors affect psychological contract, like age, your dreams in life, your personality. So therefore, it's always very important that you preserve that integrity, because when you have that integrity, then the trust and confidence would still exist, even though the expectations are not being met.
Yeah.
And basically, that's how you
Yeah.
it's a healthy, positive psychological contract.
Thank you, Migs. It's really more of the conversations and the presence of both the leader and the employee in that conversations. So it's so rich, the conversation we have today, and I really hate to end it because it's so beautiful and it's a wonderful conversations. So Migs, I would like to bring this back our conversation now to Joanne.